29 years ago, on September 29, 1996, 15-year-old Melanie Ethier, or Mel as she was known to her family and friends, from New Liskeard, Ontario, Canada, left a friend's house around 1:30 a.m. to walk a mere 12 minutes home and never arrived. The last confirmed sighting of Mel was between 1:30 and 2 a.m. when she left her friend's house. Celine, Melanie's mom, became aware of her daughter's absence the next morning, when Melanie's alarm clock woke her around 6 a.m. That's when she realized that Mel wasn't in her room, but she really didn't think too much of it at the time because it was not unlike Melanie to spend the night at her friend's house. Celine went back to bed and did not wake again until around 8 or 9 a.m. Melanie's grandparents arrived at the house at 10 a.m. to celebrate Melanie's grandmother's birthday, at which point Melanie was supposed to have finished a birthday cake that she had bought the stuff for the day before. With no cake, and though not yet really worried because Melanie was so responsible, but still being a mom, Celine was becoming alarmed. She and her father, Melanie's grandfather, drove to Tim Hortons to purchase a cake and call around in hopes of reaching Melanie, where Celine learned that her daughter had left her friend's house to walk home the night before. Celine also learned that Melanie did not go to her babysitting job that afternoon. Knowing Melanie would not just not show up to work, Celine called the New Liskeard Police Service at around 1 p.m. and reported Melanie missing. The search for Melanie began that very afternoon, Sunday, September 29, 1996. New Liskeard Police dispatched officers to the Ethier residence and began a search of the area around the Armstrong Street Bridge, where Melanie would have had to walk to get home, and along the banks of the Wabi River, all within hours of her being reported missing. By the next day, Monday, September 30th, local police requested assistance from the Ontario Provincial Police, or the OPP. Despite using helicopters, police dogs, the OPP Emergency Search and Rescue Team, checking all surveillance videos taken from along Melanie's route home the night she vanished, an underwater search and rescue team, Crime Stoppers listing her case and imploring the public to phone in tips, Child Find circulating information about Melanie, and Celine and volunteers from the community distributing posters in New Liskeard and communities as far as Timmins, Ontario, and Montreal, and searches for Melanie that continued over the decades as tips came in, one as late as October of 2021. No sign of Melanie Ethier has ever been found, not one single shred of evidence. Melanie Ethier seemingly vanished into thin air. Her walk home should have been a 12-minute walk. Instead, it became a mystery that has gripped the Northern Ontario town for nearly 3 decades. The Ontario Provincial Police have described the case as unique because Melanie appeared to vanish without a trace. New Liskeard, Ontario is a small town located on the northwestern end of Lake Temiskaming, or 157 kilometers northwest of North Bay, Ontario. It merged with the town of Haileybury and Diamond Township to create the city of Temiskaming Shores in 2004. But at the time that Melanie Ethier disappeared, it was a small town in Ontario. As of the 2016 census, the population was about 4,400. At the time of Melanie's disappearance, the combined population of New Liskeard and its surrounding communities was roughly about 11,000 people. Mel, her mom Celine, and her little sister Jessie lived in New Liskeard at the time of her disappearance. Her father was not in the picture at the time she disappeared. He was from Africa and had met Celine while he was attending mining college in Ontario. Once he was finished school, he had to go back to Africa and was never a part of Melanie's life. Melanie was of mixed race and was one of only 3 black girls in New Liskeard at the time. So let's go over Melanie's day and night of Saturday, September 28th, 1996. So that morning, she visited the home of her mother's close friend Sylvie Chartrand. Melanie, Sylvie, and Chartrand's 6-year-old daughter Stephanie were present. During this visit, Melanie broke a nail, which caused her to become upset. Sylvie later speculated that Melanie became upset because of her family's financial difficulties. Their car was broken down and phone services to their home had been cut the previous day due to unpaid bills. Melanie left the Chartrand home and went downtown, running into her best friend, who joined her. The 2 girls visited several locations in New Liskeard, including a pizza where they had lunch. Then they went shopping, where Melanie bought candies, frosting, candy hearts, and a new cake pan to make a cake for her grandmother for her upcoming birthday, which was going to be celebrated the next day before her grandparents were going out of town. The 2 girls also visited a house in nearby Diamond to collect money from someone that Melanie had babysat for. At some point, the girls met up with Melanie's boyfriend, Neil Fortier, who she had been dating for about 3 weeks, and their friends Dave Bromley, Jay Denamy, and Ryan Chatwin. The group stopped at a video rental store around 9 p.m. to 9:30 and rented the movie Sudden Death. Around 10 p.m., the group showed up at Melanie's house asking to watch the movie there, but because the place where they were staying was so small and Celine had her mother over, she didn't think there was anywhere for them to watch the movie. Melanie asked if they could watch it in her bedroom, to which Celine said, well, your room is a mess, it's up to you, and Melanie just said, let's go guys, and off they went. The group went to Samia Benajab's house to see if they could watch the movie there, but were also turned away because the family was in the middle of moving. Samia was dating Dave Bromley at the time, and she walked with the group so far with her dog but didn't join them because she had to go back home. From here, the group continued to Ryan Chatwin's home, where they ended up watching the movie. They got there around 10ish. Ryan lived on Pine Avenue. His parents were present in the house but remained in their bedroom asleep. Dave Bromley returned home at this point, so he didn't go in to watch the movie. So watching the movie that night were Melanie, her best friend, who remains anonymous, Neil Fortier, Jay Denemy, and Ryan Chatwin. Ryan's house was a roughly 10 or 12 minute walk from Melanie's home, or about 6 blocks. According to those that were present that night, the teens watched the movie quietly in the basement while Ryan's parents were asleep upstairs. They didn't drink any alcohol or take any drugs that evening, and investigators have stated that they believe that this is to be true. Before the movie finished, Jay Denemy left the house between 12:30 and 1 and went home. Melanie's best friend also left early in order to catch a ride to Haileybury, also departing at around 12:30 to 1 a.m. At the time of her departure, only 3 people remained in the house, Melanie, Neil, and Ryan. The last confirmed sighting of Melanie was around 1:30 to 2 a.m. on September 29, 1996, when she left Ryan's house and began making the 1-kilometer walk home. It was uncommon for Melanie to walk home by herself, but without phone services working at her house, she couldn't call home for a ride. One of the boys escorted her to the door and off she went. Melanie's route would have taken her through 3 intersections, over the Armstrong Street Bridge, past a gas station, an apartment building, up a back alley or along the main road, and finally to the top of Church Street where the Ethier residence was located. So the route Melanie would have taken that night, well, nobody knows for sure because she is not here to tell us, but according to her mother, and the general thought is that she would have gone down Pine, then south on Armstrong across the bridge, over the Wabi River towards the downtown core of New Liskeard, then taken the shortcut across a back alley and then up Church Street to her house on Wellington. According to her family and friends, Melanie typically preferred to use the back alley when she was making this journey. The bridge was the only portion of Melanie's route that was brightly lit, and the street would have been reasonably busy, even at this late hour when she was seen crossing it. After the bridge, the last stretch of her walk home involved a poorly lit back road where the video rental store she had visited earlier was located. As mentioned, Celine became aware of Melanie's absence the next morning when her alarm clock went off around 6 and she found that Melanie was not in her bedroom. She did think it was out of character for Melanie not to phone home to say that she was staying over, but at the same time their phone was cut, so she chalked it up to Melanie couldn't phone home to say that she was staying over, or maybe even she had fallen asleep watching the movie because she did fall asleep sometimes watching movies. All the same, it wasn't unlike Melanie to spend the night at her friend's house, so Celine went back to bed and did not wake again till between 8 and 9 a.m. Celine's parents came by at 10 a.m. to celebrate Melanie's grandmother's birthday, at which point Melanie was supposed to have had a cake ready for her grandmother, but there wasn't one. Celine has said that her mother became alarmed right away when she found out that Melanie wasn't home, and Celine was thinking this is strange, but obviously she must be okay. But Celine got her dad to drive her to Tim Hortons to buy a cake and asked there to use their phone to call Melanie's best friend to see where Melanie was. But when the best friend said that Melanie should be home, things changed. The best friend said, let me call Ryan's house to see where she is because Celine didn't have their number. So she's like, I'll call you back in a few minutes. When the best friend called Ryan's house to see where Melanie was, they told her that she had left the house around 1:30 or 2 a.m. the night before. When Celine was told that Melanie had left Ryan's house that night before to walk home, panic set in and she had her dad drive her to her close friend's house so she could start calling around to all of Melanie's friends and people that she babysat for, just in case, because you never know, someone could have asked her to babysit or something. She found out that Melanie had not gone to her babysitting job that afternoon either. So she was still making excuses for Melanie and thinking she has to be okay, but this is so out of character. But it ate her up and she just knew that something wasn't right, and that's when she contacted the police saying, quote, I know it's not 24 hours, but my daughter never ever does anything like this and I don't know where she is. Something is really strange because they said she left last night around 1:30 or 2 a.m. Something is wrong. Can you please tell your cruisers if they see my daughter to tell her to come home? I'm really worried. This is not like her. Celine left her friends and went back home and right away quote, all of the firemen and policemen were looking under the bridge that Melanie would have had to cross, and then it really hit home. Oh my god, like something was really wrong. And that's when Celine's nightmare started 29 years ago. The last confirmed sighting of Melanie, as I said, was around 1:30 to 2 a.m. on Sunday, September 29, 1996, when she left Ryan Chapman's home and began making the 1-kilometer walk to her home. One of the boys had escorted her to the door and watched her walk west down Pine Avenue East. She was wearing a green Nike windbreaker, a white t-shirt with a blue Hard Pepe logo, blue jeans, a black belt with a silver buckle, black boots with a short heel, a necklace, and a watch. Melanie Nadia, or Mel Ethier, was born on December 25, 1980. At the time, her mother, Celine Ethier, was living in Haileybury, Ontario, where she had lived since she was just 6 years old. Celine went to college in Sudbury, Ontario when she was 18. She was pregnant with Melanie at the time. After having Mel on Christmas Day, she was back in college by January the 4th, according to her, quote, because I always wanted to support myself and my child. So I went to Cambion College, took social work, and graduated the year after. And I ended up coming back to New Liskeard and working in New Liskeard. And that is where Melanie grew up, New Liskeard, Ontario. She was one of only 3 black girls in the community. Melanie's father, with whom she had no relationship, was from Botswana and met Celine while he was attending a mining school in neighboring Haileybury, Ontario, but was relocated to another school during the pregnancy and returned to Africa once his schooling was complete. According to Celine, there was no animosity between the two, but from everything I have read and heard, he did not have a relationship with Melanie. At the time of her disappearance, Melanie was an honors student at L'École Secondaire Catholique Sainte-Marie in New Liskeard, Ontario. She is described as being salt of the earth and having a lovely personality. She was known for being bubbly and happy and was like a second mother to her younger sister Jessie, who was just 5 years old in September of 1996. Melanie worked at a local daycare, Jardinerie Richelieu, and was learning self-defense from a family friend, and she also babysat for people in the community. The daycare she worked at was attached to her high school, and she would open the facility early in the morning, go to school, return after school to help the younger children off the bus, and remain until it closed in the evening. Her mother Celine also worked at this daycare while taking college courses in Sudbury, and her younger sister Jessie also went to this daycare. Reportedly, Melanie intended to become a teacher after graduating from high school. Her best friend has said that the day she disappeared, Melanie talked about becoming a teacher and volunteering in Botswana. Celine said, quote, Melanie was a very bubbly person. She hung out with a good crowd. She was in a good school, and she was responsible. She had a long-term boyfriend from grade 9 until the spring of the year she disappeared, so about a year relationship, but the two had broken up, I believe that spring, but remained friends, and at the time that Melanie disappeared, she was seeing someone new, this Neil Fortier, who was not from the French school, but was from the English high school. Her mom has said that she did not know this group of friends too well. It was a newer crowd that she was recently started hanging out with. Melanie had long braided black hair, and she was fond of wearing hair extensions. She had not been diagnosed with any known mental illnesses and was not taking any medications, and her friends who knew her at the time of her disappearance do not believe that she was suffering from any undiagnosed conditions. The search for Melanie began on the afternoon of September 29th, the Sunday, between 2:30 and 3 p.m. New Liskeard police dispatched officers to the Ethier residence and began a search of the area around the Armstrong Street Bridge and along banks of the Wabi River within hours of Melanie being reported missing. Local police requested assistance from the Ontario Provincial Police, or the OPP, on Monday, the 30th of September, a helicopter from Sudbury, a police dog team from North Bay, and a search and rescue dog from the Office of the Fire Marshal of Ontario were dispatched to expand the search around Pine Avenue, as were an OPP emergency search and rescue team and an Ontario Hydro helicopter the following day, the Tuesday, October 1st. A psychic with a history of contributing to police investigations also joined the search. More than a dozen police officers and volunteer firefighters canvassed the areas where Melanie had last been seen, and police forces across Ontario were alerted to the disappearance. Although authorities conducted a door-to-door canvass, no homes in the area were entered. Police stated that they checked all surveillance video taken along Melanie's route that night that she vanished, as well as the visitor logs in the Wheel Inn Motel near Pine Avenue. 2 New Liskeard police officers were assigned to lead the investigation and were joined by 2 detectives from OPP Major Crimes Unit in Amarillo during the first week of October of 1996. All of the friends who were with Melanie the night she disappeared were questioned by police. In the days following her disappearance, police surveillance was conducted on 3 local girls who may have been the intended targets of the attack on Melanie. These girls, other local teens, and one was an exotic dancer in Notre Dame du Nord who bore a strong resemblance to Melanie, were occasionally spotted by witnesses and mistakenly reported to police. These were the other 2 black girls. And this is something that would happen quite often throughout the years, that these girls were mistakenly thought to be Melanie. The week of October 5th to 6th, 1 week after Melanie disappeared, the 424 Transport and Rescue Squadron performed training exercises in the area and also participated in the search. On Tuesday, October the 8th, an underwater search and rescue team began a 3-day search of the Wabi River between the Armstrong Street Bridge and Lake Temiskaming, though clay deposits in the river reduced their visibility and forced them to search by touch alone. At some point, a Lockheed C-130 Hercules military transport aircraft was also used to search the area. By mid-October, Melanie's case was listed with Crime Stoppers and the public was implored to phone in tips which could help investigators locate her. Search teams weren't able to find any signs indicating where Melanie had disappeared from or where she was taken. Officially, no evidence has been recovered in the case, though according to the Ethier family, a single item may have been recovered by police on the first day of the search, but this has never been made public. And honestly, that's quite possible, as police are known to keep things close to the vest, and I would imagine specifically in a case that has no evidence, if they had found one thing, they would keep that under wraps as much as possible. OPP statements to the media made it clear detectives believed that Melanie had no reason to leave the community and they suspected that foul play was involved. Police never recovered any security footage from the Night Owl convenience store, which was located 1 block away from the Pine Avenue residence. Shortly after her disappearance, missing persons posters and billboards with her picture were put up in New Liskeard and surrounding communities. Some of these remained in place as late as 2020, and others have since been replaced. I do not know how many or if any still exist to today. One particularly well-known billboard outside of Latchford pairs a photo of Melanie with the question, "You know what happened to me, so why don't you help?" Celine and volunteers from the community, including Jay Denemy, who was one of the boys that was there with her the night she disappeared, distributed posters in New Liskeard and communities as far as Timmins, Ottawa, and Montreal. Celine also wrote a letter to the editor, published in a November issue of the Temiskaming Speaker newspaper, and sent information about Melanie to media companies in Toronto in the hopes of keeping attention on the case. Child Find began circulating information about Melanie and her disappearance across Canada by December of 1996. Shortly before Christmas of 1996, the Tri-Town Region Crime Stoppers doubled the reward money offered to anyone who could resolve the case, bringing the value up to $2,000. But in December of 1998, this reward was increased to $25,000. By 1997, 2 officers were assigned to work the case full-time, the Liskeard Police Sergeant Dwight Thibb and OPP Detective Constable Bill Deverell. They began re-interviewing witnesses in early 1997 in order to exhaust all possible leads in the case. By September of 1997, OPP Inspector Pete Burns had taken over the case. The task force dedicated to searching for Melanie was formally disbanded in 1998, but both Thibb and Deverell would continue to work on the case when new leads appeared. Deverell would later say that he remained on the case up until the day of his retirement, which was December 31st, 2002, and Thibb continued working on the case until 2007. Over the course of the investigation, the 2 officers interrogated hundreds of suspects and persons of interest. The OPP conducted another search for Melanie on April 26, 1999, focusing on the Dawson Point area to the east of New Liskeard, which had previously not been investigated. In the summer of 2000, police seized materials from the landfill in McGarry as part of this investigation. Now, New Liskeard, as I mentioned, was amalgamated into the city of Temiskaming Shores in 2004, joining with the neighboring communities of Haileybury, Diamond, and North Cobalt, and the OPP then took over the law enforcement for the area in 2007. OPP Constable Jennifer Smith admitted that some tips that were issued to New Liskeard police about the case may have not been passed on during the transfer of duties. police. In 2010, 14 years after Melanie vanished, an eyewitness account of Melanie crossing the Armstrong Street Bridge was made public, and more details of the sighting were actually released in 2021. According to Celine, Melanie's mom, for many years there was never a sighting of Melanie, but at some point when she was at Walmart, this was years after Melanie had disappeared, she was approached by a woman and said, "Did the police tell you that me and my husband saw Melanie that night on the bridge?" Celine didn't know and asked her if they had ever talked to the police. She said that she did talk to an officer, but this information was never entered, so this was one of the tips that didn't make it over to the OPP from the New Liskeard police. Anyways, Celine gave this woman the contact information for investigators, and it turns out the investigators were able to go back and look through information, and sure enough, this tip was sent in, but Celine never knew of it. So according to this witness, she and her husband were driving across the bridge when they spotted a teenage black girl walking south on the eastern sidewalk. They saw no vehicles or any other pedestrians on the bridge. At the time of the sighting, the girl was closer to the north edge of the bridge, and the witnesses commented that the girl seemed too young to be alone at night but was walking unbothered at a normal pace, while her husband remarked that he was not aware that there were any black girls in New Liskeard. Although the witnesses believe the girl's hair may have been in dreadlocks, it is possible she misidentified the braided extensions that Melanie was wearing. This account was not reported to police until 1997 or 1998, when the woman apparently seen Melanie's photo. Anyway, reportedly this tip was not properly logged into police records and would not be investigated until the 2000s, when the witness approached Celine directly at the Walmart, at which point Celine urged police to revisit this sighting. Now, police say that they were not made aware of this witness account until 2008. These people placed Melanie on the bridge around 1:30 or 2, and from the bridge to her house would have been less than a 5-minute walk. But I don't know if it makes any difference really in helping finding Melanie, but I guess at least it does place her on the bridge, so we know that, if the account is right, and if it was Melanie, but I would imagine it probably was, because it don't say there were too many young black girls walking the bridge that hour at night, considering the time and the fact that she was one of only 3 black girls in town. So, if the people are telling the truth, it probably was Melanie that night on the bridge. A second witness came forward in 2008 to 2009 to state that they had seen Melanie on the Armstrong Street Bridge that night as well. Now, according to this witness, they had been at the King George Tavern, located 2 blocks from the south end of the bridge, until around 1 a.m., when they picked up food and coffee at a nearby restaurant, Norm's Forum. As she was being driven home by her friend, the witness spotted a girl near the midway point of the bridge, around 1:45 to 1:50. From her backseat view, she saw the girl walking on the bridge's western sidewalk when a car pulled over and 2 young men exited the vehicle. The boys then proceeded to corner the girl and coerce her into entering their vehicle before speeding off. The witness recalled the vehicle being a small blue or light-colored sedan, but could not remember what the girl she saw looked like. Of note here, police detective Rob Matthews has expressed a doubt about the authenticity of this version of events and has stated that media reports about similar sightings have caused an influx of non-credible tips from people who allege they saw an abduction take place on the bridge that night. But hey, who knows? Maybe she did see Melanie get abducted. I mean, someone took her, most likely. Another witness who lived on Rebecca Street, just off Pine Avenue and near docks, took her story to police in 2019. In a 2021 interview, this witness, known to the public only as Denise, said that at around 1:45 on September 29, 1996, she was doing schoolwork in her room upstairs when she heard a girl screaming outside. Although she initially ignored this, she heard more screaming about 45 seconds later and became frightened. She ran and checked that her front door was locked, and then she snuck to her bay window, and she says that she saw 3 silhouettes of people running down the street towards Pine Avenue, but no vehicles or headlights. And her husband, who was at home at the time, did not witness anything because he was asleep. Other tips have come in recent years of sightings, variations of Melanie being on the bridge and being taken by men in cars. Police do not necessarily believe that this information is credible. They say information received in 2008 from the witness 1, the one who had approached Celine at Walmart and said that she seen Melanie on the bridge walking while she was driving home with her husband, is probably the most credible tip. Years after Melanie's disappearance in 2020, declassified parts of Melanie's best friend's account of the evening were finally made public. So her best friend described while leaving the house that night, she encountered a suspicious vehicle herself. This vehicle slowly approached her as she crossed through an intersection, and she felt as if the people in the vehicle were assessing her. car. She was so freaked out by this that she took off running to the next intersection by the Armstrong Street Bridge, which was better lit. She described the car as white or light-colored, a Chevrolet Monte Carlo or similar two-door model with signs of being in poor condition, including a gray patch on the right side, which was likely hiding a hole or other damage. The witness believes the occupants were 2 teenage boys or young men, but she can't remember ever seeing the car again. Now, the way that Melanie's best friend walked to Melanie's house, because she did walk back to Melanie's house, and Melanie's grandparents who were there that night gave her a ride home to Haileybury. So the way that her best friend would have walked to her house that night is probably a good clue as to the route that Melanie would have taken herself, because, they were best friends and they used the same routes to get around town. And her friend walked down Pine Avenue towards Armstrong because it was more well lit, and she says it would have felt more natural. Now, whether or not Melanie went this way, obviously nobody knows, but I think it's likely that she probably did the same route. Her best friend feels that Melanie would have probably taken the same route, and she doesn't think that Melanie would have gotten into a car if she didn't know the people, but maybe if she knew who they were. Melanie's best friend remains anonymous. She has only ever spoken to the media about her experience twice and has since moved overseas. Now, the release of The Next Call, a podcast from CBC from David Ridgen about Melanie's case, has led to another witness that came forward in 2021. According to police, this anonymous male witness was unknown to them before getting in touch after hearing the podcast. And I have no more information on this tipster, but this tip led the police to La Roque Field in North Cobalt, which is roughly 10 kilometers from Melanie's last known location, where the OPP and the Northeast Emergency Response Team surveyed the site with the assistance of search dogs and drones on October 12th to 14th, 2021. The heavily forested terrain made looking for evidence difficult, and police suggested they would have to schedule additional days to continue searching the area. Whether or not they have gone back, I am not sure. So the police investigation into Melanie's disappearance has remained active since 1996. That's 29 years. The investigation is currently being handled by the Temiskaming branch of the OPP in collaboration with the OPP Crime Unit and is led by Senior Officer Detective Inspector Rob Matthews and Lead Detective Investigator Corey Belts. The province of Ontario is currently offering a $50,000 reward for information that leads to the arrest or conviction for those responsible for Melanie's disappearance. All of the OPP's information about this case has been uploaded to PowerCase, which is a newly implemented major case management system which alerts detectives to similar details in other investigations and could tie Melanie's disappearance to a wider crime spree. That's the hope anyways. But tips generated by this system have led to several digs in the Temiskaming area, which have failed, unfortunately, to recover Melanie's remains. In 2010, the OPP stated having received over 700 tips from 500 witnesses relevant to Melanie's case, as well as having over 300 persons of interests in 2020. In 2020, they were receiving on average 2 to 3 tips per month about the case, and I would imagine that those number of tips have increased a lot since 2020, specifically with the release of the CBC podcast on Melanie's disappearance. The OPP has gone on record to say that they follow up on tips offered to them by psychics, though in 2021, Detective Inspector Rob Matthews said in particular a psychic who frequently posts to YouTube claiming to be in contact with Melanie's spirit has, quote, created nothing but issues for investigators. Celine told reporters in 2017 that she no longer believes that her daughter is alive, and in a 2021 interview she said she has felt this way since the 3rd day of the search. Investigators also believe that Melanie Ethier is deceased. Celine Ethier created a Facebook group for Melanie on August 11th, 2009 called Let's Work Together to Find Melanie Ethier, and that has now 14,000 followers. As per usual, the OPP have remained tight-lipped over the last 29 years, releasing next to nothing about the circumstances surrounding the early morning hours of September 29th, 1996, and what may or may not have happened to Melanie Ethier. Like I said, foul play has long been suspected. In January of 2020, OPP launched a video series on YouTube documenting historic and unsolved cases, following the success of similar digital series on serial killers. OPP Detective Inspector Rob Matthews confirmed new tips have come in as a result of these videos. Quote, while he could not speak to specific evidence, he did point out that digital tools in use by the OPP and others can bring both pros and cons to an investigation. Enhanced technologies keep the case in the public eye, but if too much information goes public, he said, it can be difficult for police to verify evidence. Holding back key pieces of the story is how police authenticate information. Quote, quote, "We have to have evidence," he said. "Real evidence." Matthews also said, quote, he would like nothing more than to go into great detail about the information police have received over the past, at this point, 24 years, but maintained that the integrity of the investigation is paramount. Any historic investigation, he said, is challenging. Constable Jennifer Smith of the Temiskaming Detachment said, quote, "The status of the investigation is still open and it's going to stay that way until we figure out what happened to her." According to cadaverdogs.ca, since 2020, they have worked with Melanie's family and friends in an effort to locate her body and bring closure to this decades-long mystery. Reportedly, according to Detective Inspector Matthews, quote, "One friend noticed a car with headlights idling nearby. Matthews said that could be nothing, or maybe it could be something. I don't know which friend this was, but I would imagine it's Melanie's best friend who's seen that car that seemed to be assessing her." In the meantime, police say they have run down every single lead. Quote, "We don't stop working on it," said Detective Inspector Rob Matthews. So as you can imagine, when Melanie disappeared, it devastated her family and friends as well as shook the small community because there was this false sense of security when people realized that someone possibly from within that small community could do something so horrific. It was shocking. According to Celine, the last time she saw her daughter was when Melanie and her friends left her house that night, and for some strange reason, Celine had gone out to the sidewalk to watch them leave. And that's not something she said she ever did. She said she watched them walk away that night and, quote, "That was the last time I saw her." Weird how things like that happen. When Melanie first disappeared, the new Liskeard community helped search for her and supported the Ethier family. A special prayer service was held at New Liskeard's Church of St. John the Evangelist on October 2nd, 1996, 3 days after Melanie disappeared, and a second was held shortly afterwards at Paroisse Sainte Croix. Parents whose children were enrolled in the Jaderie Richelieu, the daycare where both Celine and Melanie worked, began organizing a trust fund for the Ethier family after Melanie's disappearance. Another vigil was held on December 9th and was attended by roughly 60 people. The tree, located behind the Holy Cross Parish, was adorned with yellow ribbons and photos of Melanie in order to keep the public aware of her case. And throughout the holiday season, other trees were similarly decorated with gold ribbons. Celine Ethier later stated that, "My house felt like a big funeral for the first 2 weeks because I had people dropping off food, flowers, gifts. I had a lot of contact with police. They really kept me up to date. I did many searches myself with friends." The principals of New Liskeard Public School and Haileybury Public School and École Secondaire Catholique Saint-Michel reported in October of 1996 that the event incited much discussion about personal safety among students. The Temiskaming speaker named the disappearance of Melanie Ethier as their news story of the year for 1996, and one article referred to the case as the story of the decade. The Canadian Centre for Child Protection has provided support to the Ethier family for over 20 years. The Missing Children Society of Canada has tried to bring attention to the case, citing Melanie as a case of a missing child who had yet to be located and may still be living after the victims of Ariel Castro were found alive in May 2013. Approximately 300 masked marchers attended a Walk for Awareness Bring Melanie Ethier Home event on November 7th, 2020, and their goal was to raise awareness for Melanie's case. As I mentioned, Celine created a Facebook page, Let's Work Together to Find Melanie Ethier, to raise awareness for her daughter's case, and she has concentrated her search for Melanie online, telling reporters in a 2015 interview, quote, "I feel that Facebook, because it is so known to everybody, is going to give Melanie more exposure, and I'm going to get the tip that I need to be able to find her." Reportedly, as Celine never directly revealed any details about the investigation to Jessie, Melanie's younger sister, Jessie has learned much of what she knows about the case from interactions on this Facebook page. Now mind you, Jessie was only 5 years old when Melanie disappeared, and her mother has shared that much of her life had been overshadowed by Melanie's disappearance. Though she tried her best to give Jessie a, quote, normal life, I guess you could say, a big part of Celine's energy every day has always been devoted to finding Melanie. Interest in the case increased in September of 2020 when Michael Jolicoeur, a medium, began posting vlogs to his YouTube channel claiming to have been contacted by the spirit of Melanie, much to the criticism of police. OPP Detective Constable Bill Devereux has refuted criticism that the police overlooked tips and didn't consider every possible lead in this investigation. Melanie's best friend said that since Melanie has disappeared, that the boys that were in the house with them watching the movie that night have had a hard time because a lot of people have come very close to basically accusing them of being involved. But as far as she knows, there's no evidence to suggest this, and accusing a 16-year-old boy of not walking a girl home at night in a community where everybody felt safe, she says isn't fair. Of note here, Celine has publicly stated that she does not feel that any of the boys that were with Melanie that night were involved and that they are good people that come from good families. Melanie's best friend said that Melanie's disappearance traumatized her. Melanie was like a sister to her, and when she disappeared, she had a lot of fear that it was someone that she knew, someone she was in contact with regularly. She also discussed having a lot of guilt and being angry at herself for not walking home with Melanie that night. She always wondered why she made it home and Melanie didn't. She thinks there are people out there who know what happened and would like to come forward, but maybe they are afraid to put themselves at risk. Or maybe they may incriminate or hurt someone that they care about. Or they may think that since coming forward can't bring Melanie back, then it's not worth it. But she said Melanie's memory is still very strong in the community, and there are posters and a billboard over town, and she hopes it will give someone the courage to come forward. Jay Denemy, who was one of the kids hanging out with Melanie and her group of friends that night, but went home before Melanie, says that when he goes back into town, seeing the sign with Melanie's face is a big reminder of a lot of painful memories. He said for a lot of years, he couldn't even talk about it. And though his memory is hazy, he remembers the group having a good night. He was supposed to be home by 11 or 12 that night, but ended up leaving around 12:30 or 1, and he was the first to leave the house because he had this curfew. He got a call the next morning asking if he had seen Melanie, and he said that he had seen her the night before at Ryan's house. He didn't think much more about it though until the following day, Monday, at school, when police came to the high school and he was questioned by police. He said once it got out that Melanie was missing, everything snowballed and it became very difficult for him, Ryan, and Neil, not so much Dave because Dave had left before they went into the house to watch the movie, but people were saying that they were involved and they did this and they did that, and slowly over time it mentally drained him. It really took a toll on him. He says that Neil was especially ridiculed and belittled for letting Melanie walk home. I guess, here he was her boyfriend. He said that police came to Neil's one day when they were there playing video games. He called his dad, who came over before he would answer any questions, and his dad gave the police shit for trying to talk to the two kids without any parents present. Anyway, he says the police left, and neither of those police officers ever came near him again. He wasn't sure about Neil though, and he says that he has never been polygraphed. Samia Benchavi, who was the girl whose house they tried to watch the movie at, and the one who walked with them so far and then turned around and went back home, told David Ridgen in the Next Call podcast that she had told police back in the day about a white van that had stopped her when she was on her way back home after she left the group. She had her dog with her, and she said her dog barked a lot at the two men in the van. They were asking her for directions, but her dog just kept barking aggressively, and it freaked her out. She felt a little bit scared, so she backed up and went home. So I'm just sitting here thinking, two scary encounters with two different vehicles in one small town in the same night. How weird is that? Anyway, this girl, Samia, said that this happened less than 100 meters from Melanie's house. It was a big white van with a sliding door on the side and no windows. She said the two men looked like people from the country, not from the city, whatever that means, but they gave her the feeling of not being safe. They looked to be about in their 30s or 40s, white with no glasses, but she cannot recall precise details. One was wearing a white undershirt and the van had rust on it, and she never did see the van again. Now Dave Bromley, who spent much of the day with the group and walked to Ryan's house but didn't go in because he wasn't allowed out that night, so he left before they watched the movie and went home. He describes New Liskeard as an old hick town, and he cannot get over the fact that the boys, Ryan, Jay, or Neil, did not walk Melanie home that night. He says that because of that, they have not been the best of friends since, and still to today, he cannot seem to get past why any of them didn't walk her home. He says that he was interviewed once by police in the back of a police car in his parents' driveway, but he did not take a lie detector test. He says he wants to know who it was that hurt Melanie and what happened. He hopes people have enough guts to come forward and do what's right to give people some sort of peace of mind. Neil Fortier did not do an interview, but exchanged emails with David Ridgen for the Next Call podcast, and said that he feels a lot of sadness and guilt for not walking Melanie home that night. Maybe things would have been different. He says that she was in a good mood that day and night. He says that he was polygraphed and ruled out as a suspect, but even so, some members of the public still think that he had something to do with Melanie's disappearance. 29 years on, Celine and Jesse cling to the hope that someone will find it in their hearts to come forward so that they can find Melanie and finally lay her to rest, so that they can move on with the rest of their lives. Okay, theories in this case. It is worth noting here that to my knowledge, the kids that Melanie was with that night have all been cleared by police and they are not considered suspects. Secondly, the theory favored by the OPP is reportedly that Melanie was driven away from the search area by a car on the night of her disappearance, either abducted by a stranger or lured into the vehicle by someone she knew. According to them, their search is complicated by the Trans-Canada Highway, which passes by the community and makes the possibility of a random assault by someone from outside the community more likely. Any of the theories about what happened to Melanie are speculative, as no evidence is known to the public. The suggestion that Melanie was taken by her estranged father has been dismissed by the OPP, who have eliminated him as a suspect, and as I said, he was not involved in Melanie's life. Celine has criticized the unlikely theory that her daughter was forced into a sex trafficking ring. The theory that Melanie fell into the Wabi River and drowned has been dismissed by her family, as she knew how to swim, and besides, no remains have ever been recovered from the river. Okay, so there is a side story to Melanie's disappearance that many people have tried to link to her disappearance since she vanished, and that involves what is known as the Crick murders. In April of 1996, 47-year-old Louis Gauthier had been murdered in Thornley, which is about 20 minutes north of New Liskeard, by two minors, Michael Lafreniere, who Gauthier had engaged in a sexual relationship with, and his half-brother, 17-year-old Robert Goulet. The boy's uncle, Gregory Crick, helped plan the attack. Crick suspected Goulet was drawing unwanted attention to their family, and he had informed police of their involvement in the Gauthier murder. Robert Goulet went missing in New Liskeard on November 6th or 8th in what appeared at the time to be another teen vanishing. His body was found in a Hillard gravel pit and was ultimately determined to have been stabbed either by Michael Lafreniere or Gregory Crick. The surviving brother and Crick were arrested for the murder of Gauthier in December of 1996. According to police, Robert Goulet attended a party in October or early November of 1996 where he allegedly admitting to disposing of a body and putting it through a wood chipper. So here you are in a small town, you have this murder, and just a few months later, Melanie goes missing. So according to Celine, quote, a lot of attention was put on these murders because everybody in town was saying, like, nobody else goes missing after they're in jail. So it's got to be them. Who killed Melanie? So that was the biggest focus for many, many years, she thinks. Now, the Crick murders, as they've been come to be called in the community, are a main focus of many online theorists surrounding Melanie's case. But according to Celine, a lot of work has been put into eliminating these people as suspects by police because a lot of fingers were being pointed at them. And reportedly, no link has ever been formally established between the Crick murders and Melanie's disappearance. Investigators, including OPP Detective Constable Bill Deverell, who worked both cases, and then New Liskeard Police Chief Doug Jelly, and OPP Detective Inspector Rob Matthews, who was a senior officer on Melanie's case as of 2021, have denied any connection between the Crick murders and Melanie's disappearance. According to police, nothing has ever been revealed of significance at this point to connect both crimes. And really all the two cases have in common, pretty much, is that they happened close to the same time in the general same area. Another theory that persists concerns mistaken identity. In 1996, Rob Goulet and his half-brother Michael Lafreniere publicly accosted two black girls with racial slurs and threatening to shoot them. One of the targeted individuals, known in the media only as Sarah, was often said to look like Melanie, to the point that they were often confused for each other by locals and even their own relatives. Sarah occasionally purchased drugs from these brothers. On Friday, September 27th, Sarah told a friend that she owed money to a local drug dealer and was afraid for her life, telling the confidant not to be surprised if she went missing over this weekend. This happened to be the same weekend that Melanie went missing. She had also spoken to police before the incident, providing information on the activities of a group of 3 local boys. Sarah, who lived on Pine Avenue at the time, was not made aware of Melanie's disappearance until Monday, September 30th, so day after. At this point, Sarah, who also went by the name of Sierra, began to refer to herself as Melanie and dress in clothes similar to clothes worn by Melanie on the night of her disappearance. I have no idea why or even if that is true. But days after the incident, Sarah told several people that she was Melanie at a bowling alley in Hillibury. I don't know why she did this. And this Sarah reportedly moved to North Bay sometime after 1998 and appears in her school yearbooks in 1997 and 1998, despite a rumor which alleged she left town weeks after Melanie's disappearance. Sometime after that, she moved to Vancouver, British Columbia. And aside from a voicemail left for her mother in February of 2020, apparently she has cut off all contact with her friends and family, and her current whereabouts and status are unknown. Peers who attended school in the area at the same time as Melanie have doubted someone would be targeted over a drug debt, as the illegal drugs circulating at the time would not have been expensive enough to justify murdering someone. Melanie and Sarah were familiar with each other and with the only other black girl in town. In a 2020 interview, the third person in this group rejected the notion that Melanie was the target of a spontaneous, radically motivated hate crime and stated that she did not believe that Melanie's attack was random. She also suggested that violent and racist threats made against her by Robert Goulet and his brother could suggest that she was the intended target that night. Now, Dave Bromley, Melanie's friend, does not agree that she resembles these other two girls in the area and does not believe that it was a mistaken identity that led to Melanie being targeted. At the time of her disappearance, Melanie had extensions which gave her hair extra length, which made her look different from the other two black girls in town who had shorter hairstyles. Melanie Louise Ethier has also been suggested as a possible target for the attack. Now, she was born in 1979, so she was only a year older than Melanie Nadia Ethier, and both attended École Secondaire Catholique Sainte-Marie at the same time. Allegedly, after the disappearance, police told Melanie Louise Ethier that they believed that she may have been the intended target the night her namesake went missing. In her 2020 interview, she recalled that police were interested in her friendship with another student who was actively dating Michael Lafreniere and suspected that the brothers may have believed that she knew something about their criminal activities. In addition, her mother was the cousin of Louis Gauthier, who they had murdered in April of 1996. After questioning why they would mistake someone of a completely different height, build, and race for her, police told this Ethier that the brothers may have asked someone else to attack her, and knowing only her first and last names, that person had gone off after the wrong individual. Now, she alleges that the last time she spoke to Michael Lafreniere was in a park near her home, where he behaved anxious and insisted somebody was watching them. He asked her if she believed he had killed her cousin. She denied any suspicions, but later stated that she did believe that he was involved in both the murder of Gauthier and the disappearance of Melanie Nadia Ethier. As recently as 2021, police have stated that they do not believe that Melanie was attacked because she had been mistaken for somebody else, so do not think that this is what happened to her, but police did not elaborate on why they thought this, so, who knows? Another theory involves local suspects, different scenarios. For instance, after May 1996, bars in Ontario were able to remain open till 2 a.m., while bars in Quebec could stay open till 3. Witnesses who were at the bar docks in New Liskeard the night of September 28, 1996, have submitted tips to investigators stating that they saw an intoxicated person leave the bar early in order to reach a bar across the provincial border before last call, and that one of these drivers may have struck Melanie with their car. That does sound plausible, and maybe they took her body elsewhere. Apparently, in a 1999 search of the area east of New Liskeard was sparked by a tip sent to police alleging that Melanie had been hit by a car on the night of her disappearance. The tipster said that the person responsible was driving with a suspended license and had only recently been let out of jail, and in a panic loaded Melanie's body into her trunk and buried her at Dawson's Point. And allegedly, though police investigated this site, no remains were found. In 2000, police retrieved materials from the landfill in McGarry Township while investigating a rumor suggesting that a group of teens from Virginia Town were responsible for Melanie's disappearance. I do not believe anything was found in this search either. Another theory involves white supremacist groups who were active in the Timiskaming area in the 1990s, and that Melanie's disappearance was considered a likely hate crime in the early days of the investigation. She was one of only 3 black girls in New Liskeard. Following her disappearance, the other girls were reportedly, I don't know if this is true, but reportedly placed under police surveillance in case that they were targeted next. In an interview, Melanie's younger sister, Jessie, described having to change schools often to get away from racial abuse before finally switching to homeschooling, and has since moved to southern Ontario to avoid having to raise her own children in such a racist environment. Another theory, well, not really a theory, but an idea, involves a local fishing spot. According to locals, the spot is located under the Armstrong Street Bridge, which is accessible by footpaths in the area, and some think it is possible that a witness, or even a suspect, may have been fishing for a walleye on the night of Melanie's disappearance, but nobody has ever come forward to my knowledge. Well, I mean, obviously a suspect wouldn't, but I don't know if this is anything or not. Another theory that persists is that Melanie was assaulted by her friends, more specifically the boys that she was left with, Neil, Jay, and Ryan. And I could really see why, though they have been cleared by police and Celine does not believe that they are suspects. I mean, how does one really know that Melanie actually left that house that night? Because they say so? I am not, and I will be very clear, I am not saying that that is what I think, but I can see why this theory does persist. The last time that Melanie was seen was with these boys. She vanished and nobody can corroborate their story. I can see why people think that they say they had something to do with her disappearance and covered it up. Now, police first took statements from the boys on Monday, September 30th at their high school, with the vice principal as the only adult present. Rumors about their involvement negatively, as you can imagine, affected their mental health. All of the boys that were with her that day. 2 investigators, OPP Constable Kevin Murphy and the Liskeard Police Detective Dwight Thibb, made a more forceful attempt to question 2 of the boys, Jay Denemy and Neil Fortier. Remember that they went to the house and Jay's father put a stop to that. Anyway, of all the 3 boys, Neil, Jay, and Ryan, only Neil Fortier, to my knowledge, was the only one ever asked to take a polygraph test, which he says he passed, and apparently the other 2 have volunteered but have not been tested, but regardless, police have said that neither one of them are suspects or persons of interest in what happened to Melanie. Another boy who had dated Melanie for some time prior to the summer of 1996 was also eliminated as a suspect early on in the investigation. Another theory involves Melanie being assaulted by a stranger. Bars in the area would have been closing around the same time that Melanie began walking home, putting her on the streets at the same time as the bar's drunk patrons were leaving. Witness described 2 female hitchhikers seen outside Doc's bar at 2:10 who were later identified by police and ruled out as suspects. As it was a busy Saturday night, police officers and 2 cruisers had been assigned to monitor the bar but did not note any suspicious activity. There were also 3 weddings happening in town that night, and possibly a small party going on elsewhere on Pine Avenue on the weekend of September 28th to 29th. And someone who had been drinking at a get-together or was from out of town may have come across Melanie and seized on the opportunity to assault her. Melanie's route would have also taken her past 2 gas stations, an Esso and a Mr. Gas, both of which are likely to have been open at the time that she walked by. Friends of Melanie have stated that she would likely not have voluntarily entered a stranger's car and would only have accepted a ride from someone that she knew, but had she been forced, it is unlikely that she would have been able to fend off a group of people or a fully grown adult. A decorated conservation officer with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestries, who operated in New Liskeard from 2001 to 2020, has said in a 2020 interview that he doubts one popular theory that suggests that Melanie was killed by hunters from the United States. He says that at the time of her disappearance, the only hunting season that would have been open would be for small game and bear. And in the 1990s, most bear hunting took place in the spring rather than the fall, and the small game season rarely drew anyone from out of town to the community, and big game hunters would be required to stay with a licensed outfitter or lodge. Of particular interest to the case is the suspicious vehicle encountered by 2 girls who were with Melanie on the day she disappeared. Samia Benchabi, who had briefly walked with the group and then turned around and went home, encountered that white van. She found the conversation uncomfortable, her dog was barking aggressively, she got freaked out, backed up, and went home. This van was also spotted that night by a video store employee. And this employee, who was the sister of one of the male friends Melanie was with, had seen Melanie earlier that day and even paid for the movie that the group had rented. One man, either the driver or his passenger, entered the rental store at around 10:30 and loitered around, ignoring the clerk's offer to help him find what he was looking for, and left without ever saying a word. He was wearing blue work pants, which looked unwashed and discolored, a grungy white shirt, which had been extensively yellowed, and work boots. He was described as being of average build with dirty blonde hair, in his mid-40s, standing roughly 5'8" to 5'9". She described the van as being a beat-up white utility van with no signage. She wasn't able to take down the license plate number because it was parked in a dark spot. After the man left, the clerk, who would normally walk home but felt threatened by these strangers' behavior, called her father to pick her up when the store closed at 11. Now, police reportedly did not question this clerk until 2020. I do not know why. Another theory is that Melanie was assaulted by a serial killer. At the time of her disappearance, as many as 3 known serial predators were active in the Temiskaming area. Richard Bouillon was a convicted sexual predator who murdered his 16-year-old neighbor, Julie Stupanot, in Terrebonne, Quebec on November 15, 1999. Paul and Alan Hatche was a repeat violent offender who was ultimately convicted of 3 sexual assaults which took place in Edmonton and 2 murders which took place in Ontario. He had murdered 46-year-old Larry Arnold on October 14, 1994. He also murdered 20-year-old Sarah Whitehead on August 7, 1997, while she was walking home from the mall along a footpath in North Bay. He was arrested in Calgary in December of 1997 for another sexual assault. Police in Hatche's hometown of Sturgeon Falls, Ontario, made the connection between him and the murder of Sarah Whitehead using DNA retrieved from a cigarette butt at the crime scene in Calgary to tie him to the crime as well as the assaults in Edmonton. Although he was active in the area, his modus operandi, or MO, does not match the details, though, of Melanie's disappearance, and apparently the OPP do not consider him a suspect. Michael Wayne McGray was a serial killer who was active and transient at the time of Melanie's disappearance. Between 1985 and 1998, he killed at least 6 girls between the ages of 7 and 18 years old, and has since claimed to have been responsible for 11 more, which have yet to be linked to him. McGray's confirmed crimes took place in Dartmouth, Moncton, Montreal, St. John, and Weymouth, but he claims that his yet undiscovered crimes occurred in more distant locales such as Calgary, Seattle, and Vancouver, and he was arrested on March 1st, 1998. And then there is this guy who was not a serial killer, but a close family friend named Dennis Leveille. So if there ever was a creep, this guy is that creep. So Dennis Leveille was a friend of the family, close friend of the family, and according to Celine, he is the one that she believes killed Melanie the night that Melanie vanished. And once I tell you his story, you're going to see why. So he was in a long-term relationship, like a 37-year relationship with Sylvie Chatrin, who was Celine's best friend since they were about 6 years old. The couple remained together until his death in 2016. Okay, so Sylvie's son Jason from a previous relationship and Melanie were the same age. Sylvie's daughter with Dennis, Stephanie, is close in age to Melanie's younger sister Jessie. The two families spent a lot of time together and the children were like siblings. The Ethier family spent a lot of time in this home. In fact, Melanie had been there the morning she vanished. Now, Dennis Leveille worked as a driller in mines, sometimes leaving New Liskeard for as long as 4 months to work in distant places like Northwest Territories, Mongolia, Chile, and parts of Africa. He stood at about 5'8" to 5'9", and he weighed about 280 pounds. And in 1996, he alternated between driving a white or gray pickup truck and his mother's small gray 4-door car. According to him, he had a terrible childhood. He told his partner Sylvie that he had been sexually abused by various young men, including babysitters, when he was a child. He was physically abused by his parents, who were both heavy drinkers and negligent towards his siblings, leaving him to care for them. Dennis had been injured in a head-on collision on June 17, 1990, when his vehicle was struck by an intoxicated young woman, and as a result, he required dynamic compression plates and a back brace to be able to walk, though he did so with difficulty and continued to lose his mobility over time. Although he would be rewarded a $600,000 civil suit in 1993, he would continue to live with chronic pain and was put on a variety of pain medications, including Oxycontin, before turning to other substances like cocaine, cannabis, and Percocets to deal with his pain. He invested much of his money he received from this suit in a business which failed, forcing him to return to work in the mining industry despite his disability. Okay, so the weekend of Melanie's disappearance, Dennis Leveille told his partner Sylvie that he and his stepson Jason were going out of town fishing with his brother Andre and Jason's friend Joel. Dennis would years later say that this was a lie, and the truth was that they had attended a motocross competition in North Bay that weekend. Now, Andre was a motocross racer, and there were several racetracks active in the area at the time. Now, this alibi of a motocross race was sort of corroborated by Jason in a 2020 interview though he did say that his memory of that time was spotty at best due to the trauma of losing Melanie, but he was fairly adamant that they did not go fishing that weekend, which, by the way, like I said, was the story for many, many years. Andre, Dennis's brother, has denied any memory of where they had gone that weekend. Joel, meanwhile, has said that he was at a large house party in New Liskeard that weekend, and if they had attended a motocross competition, it would have only been a day trip. At some point, like years later, Dennis told Sylvie that he had spent time at a bar that weekend without Jason or Joel. So right off the bat, the story of where these four men were that weekend has some big holes. I mean, the story of where Dennis Leveille was that weekend has some big holes. But apparently, as the story went for many years, wherever they were, they returned home sometime between 12 and 4 o'clock on September 29th. That afternoon, Dennis told several neighbors he was assisting with the search and even borrowed his friend's dog to offer its services to police, which investigators have confirmed did actually happen. The day after Melanie was reported missing, her grandmother had what she calls an unnerving encounter with Dennis when he came to the Ethier residence basement to smoke a cigarette, which she considered odd as he had never been down there before and Celine did not allow smoking in her home. 3 days into the investigation, Dennis drove Celine to a psychic and commented that the person who had harmed her daughter would have had to been very strong as she was capable of defending herself. And to prove his point, he showed Celine fresh, deep nail marks on his arm, which he said Melanie had left on him while they were play fighting. Obviously, this was unnerving to Celine and she instantly became suspicious of Dennis, as according to his own version of events, he had gone out of town the Friday before Melanie disappeared and had only returned after she was reported missing. So how could she have left such fresh marks on him if she hadn't seen him since before the Friday when he supposedly left on his fishing trip? I mean, he wasn't to have supposed to been there the Saturday she had visited the home, the day she vanished, and these marks were apparently fresh. And Celine is not the only person who saw these marks. When Celine pressed him about the marks, he told her that he had seen Melanie working as a stripper in nearby Notre Dame du Nord, though this was later found to have been the other black girl who resembled Melanie. I guess here he was just saying whatever to kind of get Celine off topic. In the years following these interactions, Celine distanced herself from Dennis's family because she was suspicious of him. And there were 2 occasions over the years that he called Celine while he was in a hotel room threatening to commit suicide. On both occasions, she went there because she thought he was preparing to make a confession about his role in Melanie's disappearance, but he never did. And as I was reading through all of this and listening to all of this, I thought, he did it. Other people who knew Dennis have also voiced their suspicions about those scratches on his arm, which, by the way, extended from his wrist to his elbow and looked like fingernail marks, deep ones. Years later, in the 2021 podcast with David Ridgen, Sylvie recalled Dennis showing her the marks on the afternoon after Melanie disappeared, saying that Melanie had made them while they were play fighting, though she could not understand when they would have seen each other as the marks looked fresh. Later that same day, Dennis told Jocelyn Martel, a neighbor, that the marks were caused by him brushing up against branches while looking for Melanie in the woods, and she estimated that the marks were about 1 or 2 days old as they were just starting to scab over and believed that they were caused by nail scratches. Neither of Dennis's children believed that they ever witnessed him play fight with Melanie either, and as time went on, more and more people approached Celine and told her things about Dennis, and even people who outright suspected him of murdering Melanie, and long story short, Celine is convinced that Dennis Leveille is the person who killed Melanie that night back in September of 1996. And then details started to emerge about Dennis Leveille and his sick behaviors towards young girls. So he had a long history of making sexual advances against minors, though apparently not everyone in his life was aware of the extent of this behavior, supposedly. His partner Sylvie was aware of at least a few occasions which he had made advances towards her daughter's friends, and apparently some of his friends did know that he was a pedophile. Lionel Martel, Leveille's best friend, later told media that he had warned his friend not to make sexual advances towards teenage girls, and that later in life, Leveille would occasionally, while under the influence of drugs, mention Melanie and another girl with a weird name while saying they'll never find them. Lionel also tells about a daughter of one of his relatives that was abused by Dennis. She was drugged. Now he says he never asked Dennis about this himself, but he heard about it. Dennis spent several months in a prison for this assault. he lied to Martel about where he was after being released and told him that he had been working on his uncle's farm in Alberta instead of actually being in prison. A friend later told police that on one occasion when Dennis had spotted an unfamiliar black girl in town, he commented that he had an affinity for black chocolate. Now, Stephanie Chartrand, Dennis Levier's daughter, has said that it was, quote, very apparent that he was a sexual predator for underage girls, and as a teenager she would have to check in on her friends to be sure that they made it home if he had given them a ride home. In a 2020 interview, she stated that at least 6 of her friends had come forward to describe Dennis as sexually harassing or assaulting them. At least one of the girls Dennis harassed was aware of other girls he had abused before being abused herself. I mean, I read this and I was like, oh yeah, he did it. On one occasion around 2000, he followed one of his daughter's friends into the sunroom of his house and told the girl that he would like to give her an orgasm. He had a falling out with his brothers around this time, with at least one of them making it clear that he was no longer allowed to be around his niece. Gee, I wonder why. Years later, he was briefly jailed for sexually assaulting one of his daughter's friends in the family home as his daughter and partner were asleep, though he was acquitted in court and released on that charge. In 2014, he was sentenced to serve time in prison after pleading guilty to a similar offense and was released after several months. I am not sure if this is the time that he spent in prison for assaulting his friend, Lionel Martel's niece. On multiple occasions, Dennis lured teenage girls to a hotel room, often telling them or their families that he needed a babysitter for a fictional child. About 10 years after Melanie disappeared, he lured her younger sister Jessie with a similar trick. Just imagine, Melanie's younger sister. He told her that his father had recently died, and he offered Jessie work cleaning his mother's house that afternoon. But instead, he drove her to a hotel room on the outskirts of New Liskeard and coaxed her inside. He locked the door and consumed a significant amount of cocaine while stripping naked and making sexual comments towards Jessie. He alternated between sitting on the bed and in the room's hot tub for 4 hours as Jessie pretended to be texting on her phone to avoid his advances. She had plans to meet her boyfriend at around 2:45 that day and finally convinced him to let her leave around this time. She completely cut ties with him and the Chartrand family after this incident, which convinced her that he could have had a role in her sister's disappearance. One woman known in the media only as Josephine, she says she was 14 at the time. She was a friend of Stephanie's and she had only met Dennis fleetingly a few times before she moved to Sudbury, which is a 2.5-hour drive to New Liskeard. She says that Dennis had tracked her to Sudbury and called her father, pretending that he was working in the area and that his girlfriend needed a babysitter. Her father agreed to the job and Dennis picked her up and drove her through a snowstorm to a remote motel surrounded by forest. On the way there, he told her there was no girlfriend and no one to babysit, and she said it was almost like he flipped a switch and changed. She said she sat on the bed as close to the door as she could while he snorted cocaine and offered her some, but she refused. He was commenting on her body and he was asking her questions for the next 2 hours while he became increasingly intoxicated. Eventually he drove her home. She never told her family, but Dennis began circulating the rumor that the two had had sex, and her family found out. Nobody reported it. She said even though he never physically touched her, the psychological trauma of the experience altered her life. She always thought he did something to Melanie and said to herself, what could have made them different? And maybe Melanie, she thinks, may have freaked out. Maybe Melanie let on that she was having bad feelings. She says that she never spoke to the police about this and that the police had never come to see her about it. And this was as of 2021. In 2012, Dennis arranged for a teenage girl to babysit his granddaughter, which she found out to be a lie as well when she arrived at his hotel room, and he again made sexual advances towards her. This girl later pressed charges, and he was eventually sentenced to serve time in prison, and I'm not sure who this was or if this was a different trip to prison. But I did read that all in all, he was charged with criminal offenses at least 3 times. In 2006, for failing to comply with orders not to associate or communicate with several people. In 2012, for making death threats, committing assault with a vehicle, possessing an illegal taser, and violating the terms of his parole. And in 2013, for sexual interference with someone under the age of 16. Now, while in prison, Dennis was visited by Celine, who just come right out and asked him if he was involved in Melanie's disappearance, but he said that he could never hurt Melanie and suggested that Goulet had murdered her. So once Dennis was released from prison, Celine tried to make contact with him again, but the night before she was supposed to go confront him, he suffered a debilitating stroke, which paralyzed him down the one side and put him in hospital, and it left him unable to speak. According to his family, the stress stress around having to speak to Celine and the police had probably triggered the stroke. Now, just before this stroke happened, Dennis had a conversation with his daughter Stephanie, and he asked her to speak for him when he spoke to Celine and the police. As she told her father that she couldn't do that, and she said that her father, Dennis, confessed to lying about his alibi for the weekend of Melanie's disappearance, telling her that he was at a motocross competition, and that he had driven there in his sister-in-law's car, either a beige Ford Tempo or a blue Toyota Tercel. Now, this was news to her because, like I have said before, the story for many, many years was that he was away fishing that weekend. Now, she cast doubt on this version of events, as well as the fishing, because 3 of the 4 people who went on the trip owned pickup trucks. And pickup trucks, obviously, are better suited to transport a dirt bike, so this doesn't make sense. So, 2 weeks after Dennis had his stroke on January 8th, 2016, he died in hospital. Following his death, his family said that they had come into possession of his medical records, which indicated that he experienced dissociative identity disorder, or multiple personalities. Stephanie, as described, witnessing her father's expression and mood change from his normal state into a more aggressive, predatory one suddenly on multiple occasions, and has said the diagnosis helps explain some of his behavior that had previously everybody had attributed to drug use. While hospitalized after his stroke, he was approached by a private investigator who attempted to ask him questions about Melanie's disappearance. When that detective left, he used his non-paralyzed hand to grab his daughter's scarf and pull it tightly, like strangling her, until she offered to tell the investigators to leave him alone. Now, according to his family, Dennis didn't start to begin to exhibit this behavior, this sexual aggressive, mood-changing behavior until around 1990, though one of his accusers has said that he sexually assaulted her in the 1980s when he was just 14 years old. Now, in June of 2021, 2 friends of Dennis's came forward to say that he had driven to their house while under the influence of probably drugs and alcohol in 2013 or 2014 and confessed to killing Melanie. But he refused to say what he had done with her body and later threatened them if they ever shared what he'd told. Celine has alleged that her daughter's body may be buried on this friend's sprawling property, which they purchased in May of 1996 and allowed Dennis access freely for many, many years. In a 2021 interview, Sylvie also stated that she now agrees with Celine that Dennis was responsible for what happened to Melanie that night. Now, apparently, Andre, Dennis's brother, has expressed doubt that his brother could have been involved in a violent crime. Now, Andre and his long-term partner separated in 2020, but she likewise does not believe that either of the brothers were involved in what happened to Melanie. According to Lionel Martel's sister, Jocelyn, the Sunday that Melanie disappeared, she had never seen Dennis like that. She said he was acting very anxious and he had those big scratches on his arm, and he told her that he got them in the woods from branches looking for Melanie. But she said he was acting very strange. Dennis's daughter Stephanie has said that as more things come to her attention, she thinks it is very likely that it was her father that could have hurt Melanie. She doesn't think it's far-fetched to think that he could have done it. He was a sexual predator who tried to have sex with several of her friends throughout the years. She had never asked him if he was involved because the first time that she ever looked at him as possibly being involved was the day of his stroke. But throughout the years, he would tell Stephanie that whoever took Melanie had to be strong because she was strong, and he would kill the person. Then he told her once that he had a dream where he was the one who killed Melanie, and she said this dream really messed him up for a while and bothered him for some time. Jason, like Stephanie, and many others actually, remember Dennis telling him that whoever did this to Melanie was strong because she did this to me, meaning the scratches on his arm play fighting. And Jason said that they were fresh scratches between his elbow and wrist. They were not scabbed over. In hindsight now, he wonders how could have Dennis and Melanie play fought and him have such a fresh scratch if they were away that weekend. It just didn't make sense. He says that he spent time with Dennis as a kid, but as he got older, he started to see Dennis as a bad influence on his mom and his sister, and remembered the time when Dennis started telling him about a girl that he was seeing when he wasn't with Jason's mom. And he was just thinking to himself, like, why is he telling me this? And he says that Dennis could be violent, and he remembers Dennis getting mad at him and punching walls. Now, when Sylvie talked to CBC, she told the story of the Sunday that Melanie disappeared. This was the same Sunday that Dennis and Jason had come home from their their supposed fishing trip. She said that when Dennis came walking up the front entrance to the house with Jason, she was there and told Dennis, she thinks this was around 4 p.m., what had happened to Melanie, and he said, "Oh my god, look at the mark she put on me. Whoever took her or did something to her, she's strong. Look at what she did to my wrist." And she didn't understand this because the marks were fresh, and she don't know when Dennis could have possibly seen Melanie close to this day to leave fresh marks, and she was bothered by all of this. She does say that the kids did play fight, but like in a joking point, never would anybody leave scratches on Dennis or marks like that. She now says that she really doesn't know where they were that weekend, and she's bothered by all the lies that Dennis told her, and the marks, and now she wonders if Dennis could have been involved because of all these lies. She said after Melanie disappeared, Dennis would say things like whoever did this, he was going to kill the guy. She said that he did go to jail because he tried to do things with young girls. She says it was all hidden from her, but she's hearing of more and more girls. I don't know how it could have been hidden from her if she was with him and he went to jail, but whatever. She says that her daughter knows more. She didn't know this at the time, that she's learning about all these different stories now, after the fact. She says that she never noticed anything different about Dennis after Melanie disappeared. She never thought that he could do it, and said that he played it very well, that if he was involved, he played it very well, but all of these things just don't make sense, and it's too weird. She says she's now questioning all the 37 years that she spent with him, the behavior around the time that Melanie went missing, the scratch marks and his various assaults, and something else she found out about his whereabouts over the weekend that Melanie went missing. She now, after all these years, finds out that he was not fishing. She doesn't know why he would lie about that, because he could do whatever he wanted, and she found out different because apparently they didn't go fishing. That's what he had told Stephanie. She now thinks he had something to do with Melanie's disappearance. Now, according to Celine, a girl told her about a wooden marker in a cobalt cemetery that said "Rest in Peace, Melanie Ethier." This girl claimed that she had seen it while she was out walking with her boyfriend. She reported it to police. Now, Celine believes that this is where Melanie could be buried. Now, this was in 2021. I really honestly don't know what has happened since. Police say that they only learned about this years later and have no record of a 911 call. There is an interesting link to Dennis and this cemetery though, because he used to work at this graveyard and drive an ATV on the land around it. It's just a couple of blocks from a home where Dennis used to live. Now, Celine wanted this area searched, and she was connected by the CBC podcast to a cadaver dog specialist and her team, and apparently the OPP K9 unit did search an area around the graveyard but did not find anything there. Celine maintains that she considers Dennis the prime suspect in her daughter's disappearance and does not believe that police made an appropriate effort to investigate him while he was alive. Now, Sylvie Chartrand, Dennis's partner, stated that police only spoke to her about Melanie's disappearance one time, months after Melanie had disappeared, and had never spoke to Dennis while he was alive. Whether or not that's true, I really do not know. Reportedly, police only began speaking to Dennis's daughter Stephanie in the spring of 2021, and have never spoken to his stepson Jason, despite him being part of Dennis's alibi for the weekend that Melanie disappeared. And some of Dennis's accusers have never been spoken to by police. Now, whether or not this is true, I do not know. This is all allegedly, because police are being so tight-lipped, and when it comes to Dennis, they did tell David Ridgen, well, really nothing other than police contend that they have investigated him before his death and could not offer any further comments, whatever that means. And they say that his information of having dreams about killing Melanie may or may not be related to the case, and the story of Dennis with scratches on his arm was looked into before he died, but they will not say anything more. Read into that what you will. I'm pretty sure they have not eliminated him as a suspect, because they have said that with the boys that Melanie was with that night, and they had no problem saying there was no connection to the Crick murders, but Dennis Lavalle, they will not discuss. Though Celine has said that she does not believe that the police looked into Dennis enough while he was alive, she does contend that she does know that he was investigated. Maybe not as intensely as she would have liked, or maybe Celine just does not know every single thing about the investigation because the RCMP are very tight-lipped. Now, according to Celine, police have looked into Dennis because so many tips came in even from his friends, and just the fact that his story just simply did not make sense. As for the fishing story, where he was away fishing with Andre, Jason, and Joel, according to Celine, she never really got the answers that she was after from any of these men about that alibi. So I don't think anybody knows for certain to this day where they were that weekend, if they all were together. There's big holes in that weekend for those 4 men. Not saying the 4 men were involved, but Dennis's story simply does not make sense. Celine has also said that right from the start, Dennis was very involved in trying to find out what she knew from the police and what was going on. Reportedly, an anonymous source told the CBC podcast host David Ridgen that they were suspicious of Dennis's heightened interest in the police investigation and what Celine knew about it. So, is it possible that Dennis lured Melanie? Well, he did have a lot of practice. Quote, "They were just doing what normal teenagers would do, hanging out and doing a bit of shopping," says OPP Detective Sergeant Lisa Laxton. Melanie's mom, Celine, said, quote, "I was there watching them go, and that was the last time that I saw her." Celine Ethier has never given up hope. She clings to the belief that someone, somewhere, holds the key to solving the mystery of her daughter's disappearance. Quote, "Missing my Christmas baby, 22 years without a trace. Keeping the faith, keeping hope," she wrote on social media in December of 2018. "I choose to believe that the person who knows what happened to my 15-year-old daughter will come forward." The OPP series of videos made in 2020 were made because they wanted to bring older cases like Melanie's back into the public's eye, hoping someone who knows something about Melanie's disappearance will do the right thing and come forward. Quote, "I wish they would find it in their heart to come forward and end that silence. Do not go to the grave with that kind of information," says Celine in this video. As of 2025, Melanie's whereabouts and the circumstances of her disappearance remain unknown. The OPP asked, "Do you know something? If you were in the town or know someone who may have been traveling along the Trans-Canada Highway at that time and who has knowledge of the crime, contact the OPP." Quote, "It can take just one phone call," said Detective Inspector Rob Matthews. "A cold case can quickly heat up, and that's what the OPP is hoping for." According to a December 2018 OPP statement by Constable Jennifer Smith, quote, "The investigation remains active and is ongoing. The case will remain open until police can determine Melanie's whereabouts or confirm what happened to her. And they continue to appeal to the public for any leads, emphasizing that every piece of information, no matter how small, will be examined thoroughly." Quote, "The OPP prides itself on investigative excellence and has a long-standing of tradition conducting thorough and detailed investigations," OPP Constable Jennifer Smith added. That is certainly the case with the disappearance of Melanie Ethier. The case is particularly challenging as it is difficult to find answers to a person's disappearance when they have literally vanished without a trace. The case is unique as Melanie seemed to vanish without a trace. However, we still believe someone out there has the information that we are seeking in order to solve this case, said OPP Constable Jennifer Smith. When Melanie disappeared, she was just 15 years old. She was a black girl with long, black braided hair. She was 5 feet, 6 inches tall, and weighed 120 pounds. The night she vanished, she was wearing a green Nike jacket, blue jeans, a white t-shirt with a blue Heart Pepe logo, and black boots. Anyone with any information regarding the disappearance of Melanie Ethier is asked to contact the Criminal Investigation Branch of the OPP at 1-800-310-1122 or 705-329-6111. You may also anonymously report any tips to Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-TIPS or 8477. Thank you for all the support. It truly is appreciated. It still surprises me that anybody would want to support Unjust Crimes, but for anybody that would like to do that and help support the podcast, I have added a PayPal link to my YouTube page, and again, it is truly appreciated. These stories do take a lot of time to put together. You can follow Unjust Crimes on Facebook and Instagram, and I will put those links in the description to this video. Please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And until next time, thank you for your time and stay safe out there.